I've kind of been sitting on this video for some time, but I actually think that now is probably the best time to get my thoughts and ideas out there because the game's in the perfect spot right now to make significant changes since it's in early access. So that's why I think that we should revisit the current item shop and change it for a card system, which I think will be better. And I know it sounds like a hot take, but if you stick through with the video, I'll try and go through my reasons and ideas for how this could work and why I think it's definitely a better system. Before we start, I just want to clarify a few things. So, when I refer to the card system, I'm not talking about the card gem system that we had towards the end of Paragon's life. The card system that I am referring to is the original card system that we had when Paragon first launched, because with just a few tweaks, that card system will be much better than the current item shop that we have. The second thing that I want to clarify is that crests won't be affected at all by this new card system change. So let's understand how the original card system worked. First of all, it used a card point system where you gain points by reaching a certain amount of card XP. Now, this card XP essentially worked like gold, but it automatically converts at certain amounts into a card point. This experience system is fundamentally better when it comes to accessibility because smaller numbers are easier to remember and engage with. For example, are you more likely to remember that an item costs 1750 gold or that it costs 5 card points? If your aim is to make the game more accessible to new players, then opting for a card experience system is much better rather than a gold system. Now, moving on to the main part of the card system, it essentially worked like a reverse item tree. Rather than working up towards the final item, you start off with the final item and then upgrade it to increase its strength. Now, what makes this system unique is that in most MOBAs, items will have stats that do not change. For example, if two people went Terminus, they would have the same stats. However, the card system allowed these stats to be adjusted to your own liking, using the upgrades. So now, if two people were to go Terminus, one might have more physical damage, whilst the other might have more lifesteal. This system is fundamentally better for the player because it gives you more choice in your builds and playstyle. You have the opportunity to access items that you typically wouldn't use on certain characters because you can adjust the stats to your liking. Now, of course, to prevent abuse, every deck had a cap of 60 card points, but what this enabled was the ability to strategize with what cards you wanted to use and also how you distribute your stats around. So, even though two people may go the exact same cards, they could end up playing completely differently because of the stats that they've chosen. Now, this allows you as the player to create decks that synergize with how you want to play, rather than constantly being pigeonholed into playing one build for X character because it's optimal. However, it is important that we recognize what actually held this system back from being a better alternative to the item shop. Now, ultimately, it had three issues. First, the affinity system being tied to the cards and the characters meant that certain characters wouldn't have access to whole sets of cards, which essentially destroyed the vision of build diversity. The second thing was that the cards had to be unlocked before you could use them, and that meant that new players would suffer as they can't access a massive part of the gameplay. And the last part was the fact that decks had to be made before the match, and this prevented counter building since there wasn't enough space to add multiple situational items. And all these issues put together just completely negated the strengths that the card system had, and it's why a lot of these Paragon remakes have avoided using this. That being said, it is still possible to create a version 2 of this card system, which will address all these issues, and that's done by essentially merging the item shop with the card system and removing the affinities from characters. Now, here's how this will look. Right off the bat, you can kind of see that this new version hasn't really changed much in terms of the main shop's UI. It pretty much looks vertically identical and it still works just like that, with the filters on the left and being able to select the items in the middle. But the only difference is that instead of gold, it's been converted into a new currency called item points, and that essentially works the exact same way as the old card points in the old card system. The main difference is when you actually purchase and upgrade these items, as this will work similar to the old card system. You can see here that when you purchase the item, you can see the stat upgrades, and you can choose up to 3 stat upgrades for the item. Now, these stat upgrades only relate to the item, so it's why you can see here that for Terminus you can't get a stat upgrade such as ability haste or attack speed, because Terminus doesn't have those stats. You could only get physical power, crit chance, and lifesteal. Now, these stat upgrades can be freely changed. So, for example, with this Terminus, let's say you decided that you don't actually need the physical power, but you actually wanted lifesteal. What you would be able to do is change your physical power stat upgrade to a lifesteal stat upgrade, and that will just automatically update the item to reflect that. Or, for example, you might have put too many points into Terminus and you decided that you want to actually put more points into Demon Edge instead. So what you could do is you could change all of these stats to maybe 111 and then go into your Demon Edge and upgrade that to the stats that you want. This allows you to adjust for any potential errors that you might make when it comes to reaching the item cap. And it also allows for a new purchasing strategy where you might decide to rush full build early by putting cheap stat upgrades into your items and then slowly upgrading them as the game progresses. Or you could just follow the conventional route of upgrading one item at a time. Now, with the first strat, you get access to more item passives at the cost of having overall lower stats. And the second strat just grants you higher stats at the cost of less passives. Now, it's worth noting that if you were to sell an item, it will not refund the items that you put into that item, both for buying it and also upgrading it. So in this example with the Terminus, you would lose the item points to buy it and also the item points used to upgrade the item. When it comes to the item passives, what happens is that if the item only has one passive, you would unlock the passive once you fully upgrade the item. And if the item has two passives, then the first passive is granted when you buy the item, and the second is granted when you fully upgrade the item. And this allows for items such as Mind Razor and Azure Core to work exactly like they were before, where you don't have to fully buy the item until you've finished the stacks. This is the main part of this new item system. However, there are also two additional features that I think could be implemented to just really round this off. The first feature is the use of starter items. Now, with the original card system, there were multiple starter items which would either grant you a stat increase or some sort of passive ability. This was great because it stopped the early game from being the same every time, as now you had the choice of either immediately jumping into your first card or buying starter items. Now, coming into this new item system, all the tier 1 and tier 2 items can now be repurposed into those starter items, which will either grant you stats or some sort of passive. This just helps to diversify the early game, and again, it just gives more choice to the player as they can choose how they want to play the early game. By making these items refundable, it also ensures that players won't feel like they're missing out by buying these items. The second feature is kind of like a rework of the old card affinity system. Now, how this will work is that every item is linked to an appropriate set of items, and if you equip multiple items in that same set, you gain a small stat boost that relates to that affinity. Now, this just adds a little extra layer of complexity, and it also ensures that typical builds that you might go aren't completely overshadowed with new item combinations. Ultimately, this new item system brings the best of both worlds. It gives you as the player more choice and strategies, whilst also keeping similar to the format of an item shop. Now, the only major flaw I can see is that balancing this new item system will take some time to achieve, but I think that that shouldn't be a deterrent from trying new things. It's only through experimenting and testing that these new systems and concepts can actually work. I just want to give a huge thanks for everyone for sticking through with this video, and if you have any thoughts and opinions on this new system, let me know in the comments or wherever you might see this video.